Progressives are swinging back and forth between being very, very worried and very, very relieved.
There's a conventional wisdom that's been developing in Republican circles that this indictment might help him politically because it feels like he's being targeted all over again.
He's trying to use this to raise money and to stoke up his supporters. In fact, just tonight, he sent out about 4 or 5 fundraising letters asking people for contributions, and is also selling T-shirts that say, "I support Trump."
Welcome back. So far, we've spent most of our time talking about the legal consequences of Donald Trump's indictment, but maybe more far-reaching are the political consequences. Remember, this is a man who has every intention of running to be president again in 2024, and Trump's influence cleaves through a huge swath of American voters and right down the middle of the Republican Party itself. His allies were quick to line up at his defense. Take a look from Republican Senator Ted Cruz. The Democrat Party's hatred for Donald Trump knows no bounds. The substance of this political persecution is utter garbage. From the number 2 House Republican, Steve Scalise. The sham New York indictment of President Donald Trump is one of the clearest examples of extremist Democrats weaponizing government to attack their political opponents. And from the House Judiciary Chair, Republican Jim Jordan, just one word: outrageous. Even the man seen as Trump's number 1 rival, Ron DeSantis, has harsh words. And pay close attention to where his outrage is directed. It is un-American, he says. The Soros-backed Manhattan District Attorney has consistently bent the law to downgrade felonies and to excuse criminal misconduct, yet now he is stretching the law to target a political opponent. And Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is even more direct on this front, saying the House will hold Alvin Bragg and his unprecedented abuse of power to account. Now, Alvin Bragg, that's the district attorney, the DA of New York, who brought this indictment to the fore. To Republicans, he is now public enemy number 1. And Trump, he may very well see it that way too. From his official statement, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who was handpicked and funded by George Soros, is a disgrace. I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, and then we will defeat Joe Biden. He signs off, "Make America Great Again." Familiar catchphrase, and a nod to 2024. Now, Aaron Blake is with the Washington Post. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. So, Aaron, on Trump's chances in 2024, I guess, first of all, is he even allowed to run, given that he's facing these charges?
Well, the short answer is yes. The U.S. Constitution prohibits being able to vote if you are a felon, but you can still run for office. So if Donald Trump were, being indicted doesn't affect anything. Being convicted would mean, yes, he can run, but he wouldn't be able to vote for himself. So that's kind of the unusual situation in which we would find ourselves.
But I guess in order to win any election, he does need support from voters writ large. And I can't quite seem to figure out whether a development like this helps him or hurts him, right? Like does it fire up his supporters or does it kind of turn them off?
Yeah, I think you need to look at it in 2 ways. You need to talk about 1, the primary, and 2, the general election. In the primary, there is some kind of anecdotal evidence that we've seen from the polls in recent weeks that this increasing scrutiny, the possibility of these charges has at least coincided with him building a bigger lead on Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's the other kind of main contender here. As for the general election, I think there's a lot more skepticism that this would eventually help him. That's because these are voters who don't like Trump in the first place, and would they be believing that this was a witch hunt and that he was persecuted here when they didn't like the guy in the first place? If you look at polls of these kinds of investigations, what you'll generally find is a small majority of Americans, the low 50s, they believe these are legitimate things to probe. The people who believe that this is a witch hunt, that this is illegitimate, are generally around that kind of 40% of people that Donald Trump has been able to count on throughout his political tenure. And that's not enough to win a general election.
And what about the Republican Party itself? same sort of question, right? Like I sort of wonder whether the pro-Trump faction within the party, whether this bolsters their effort, or whether, as I think a lot of people have suggested, there are just too many people within the party who may be sick of him.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. If you look at the response from the Republican Party last night, it very much echoed what we saw 8 months ago after the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago for classified documents that the former president had in his possession. It was defending Trump to the hilt, despite really not knowing anything about what had just happened. We didn't have the affidavit for the search back then. We don't have the actual charges today. And I think that reinforces that even as these Republicans see value in moving beyond Trump in 2024, they also feel this strong pull towards defending him when something like this is happening. They don't believe that they can effect that complete break from Donald Trump. And so I think what this does is it really turns the focus back on Trump and forces them to pick sides in this whole thing. And that's something that in the past, at least, has helped Donald Trump rally the base behind him. And so at least in the short term, I wouldn't be surprised to see that kind of a rallying effect. Whether this is going to dominate people's views as people are voting next year, early next year in the primaries, I think that's another matter, certainly.
But there has to be some version of reality where even Donald Trump himself is weighing all of the things that you've just mentioned. I mean, they're there for everyone to see, and so I can't help but wonder whether, despite all of his sort of previous pronouncements on his intention to run in 2024, whether he might reconsider.
Well, certainly having a criminal case hanging over you is going to be a distraction. We don't know how serious that is, how long it's going to take. I think it's also worth emphasizing that this is not the only potential investigation and potential indictment that we might see. There are what's generally acknowledged to be more serious investigations involving his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. We also, of course, have the classified documents that he kept, which might be the most likely candidate for some kind of criminal charges. And so it begins to be not just like this one case looming over him, but all of these things looming over him. And what we've seen before is that that's something that Republicans seem to grow a little bit tired of, at least when it was kind of a little bit lower down in the news. Right. And now we'll see whether they think it's in their best interest to put forward a candidate who could be having these things loom over him. And there may be things that we don't know right now that we could learn after he would be nominated.
Aaron Blake of the Washington Post, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.